My Yavanna, one and all, and thank you for joining us on the Literary Baptists. I'm Lee, and I'm joined by Zach and Maddie this evening. How are you all?
Tired.
I'm
So
happy to
eager
be here.
Thank you.
Me
I
too,
appreciate
but
that.
I would also be
whatever.
happy to be in bed. So whatever.
We're missing Nick tonight because he and his family have been moving, and I believe they were intercepted by some of the forces of Angband on their way to their new abode, and our best wishes and thoughts and prayers are with them as they try to escape the icy grasp of Morgoth tonight. So
You weren't going to
So our
send
next-
them some positive vibes?
I would mail them some lembas, but I don't have an address. You got to keep up your strength.
Yes.
Well, it'll be his loss because I think this is a really fun, if short, chapter of the Silmarillion that we have tonight. So it's the chapter of Aule and Yavanna, a chapter that could have ended in divorce if somebody else had written it. I think that's my hot take at the beginning.
Nah. Never happened.
I don't know.
So,
Yavanna's pretty spicy.
You know, Yavanna, I really liked her as a character, just kind of the way that she's basic. This is like her introduction, basically, like as a personality. I don't think we really heard much from her in the previous chapters. So I enjoyed kind of seeing a little bit about her motivations and what makes her tick and what gets her ticked off. Thanks, Zach. I'm a real professional, and I do these things. And
What are you talking about? What did I do?
You're just
you
giggling.
you laughed at my very obvious joke. I appreciate
it. Yeah. You're welcome. I'm easily amused. So
yeah, you are. You're on a tear tonight. This is gonna be great. Can't wait to hear you snoring into your microphone.
I might say some weird stuff.
Good. I support it.
Or be incoherent. You never know.
So I guess just to give some highlights of this chapter for anybody listening, if you don't already own a copy of the Silmarillion, first of all, shame on you because you should. And number two, once you've acquired that copy of the Silmarillion, you really should read this very, very short chapter and then come back to the podcast. And so you can hit pause right here and read what is in my copy, exactly 2 pages of text. Well, actually, it's one entire page, two faces of a page in my book. I don't know about anybody else's, but I have this
a large book,
lovely paperback edition.
Mine's like
which I bought in store.
Mine's like 4 pages.
4 pages.
But I have like the short little.
Like mass market paperback version.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the pages are small.
Like a plebe.
I have some fancy ones, but this is my notated book here. I've got some notes.
Man,
we need a wide margin Silmarillion.
Dude. So
journal Silmarillion, right? Do it like
not to get off topic right at the start, but doing this has reminded me how great it is to just like take notes in the margins of your paper book. Like just to like sit there with the pencil and either underline things or jot something in the margins, get some marginalia going. Like that is just, and I feel like I take in and remember, not only understand but remember what's been written better when I do that. And not just with like fiction, but even with the Bible too. Even in some of my premiums, I'll do that. even though I don't like to mess up that beautiful paper. But I do. I just love marking up a book. I think it's fun and helpful for sure. For me,
You know what's
anyway.
annoying though is when you buy a used book and somebody else wrote notes and highlighted it, and you're like, no, I don't agree. Why did you highlight that? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. The only time that was helpful was in school. Like if I bought a used textbook and somebody like, I feel like they already did my homework
Yeah.
for me. Thanks, nameless stranger.
That's right. That's like I got lucky.
Yeah, it's like jackpot.
Aced this class.
They put an entire highlighter in this thing for me. Thank
Or you get the one that literally every sentence is highlighted.
That was
Yeah.
probably
Oh
mine.
yeah.
This sounds important. This probably is important too. I'll just go ahead and highlight that. That's probably important.
It's like I can't remember who made the meme. I hope it was one of you guys, but I don't know if it was. It was a while back, and somebody was like, a brand new Calvinist reading Romans, and it's just every line has yellow highlighter on it.
Yep.
Yes.
Legit.
That was how my first Bible when I got reformed started out. It was just constant highlighting everything. I'm like, if everything's a highlight, then nothing's a highlight. And then I stopped.
When I was reading Samuel Renahan's Mystery of Christ, I got to the point where my non-highlighted sentences were like highlights in and of themselves. Like I would just be like, well, I'll just not highlight that part because it'll stand out among the highlighting.
Yeah,
I'll
I
remember
loaned.
why I did that later too.
Yeah, and then you look back and you're like, I can't
Why did
pull
I do
anything out of it. Nothing is highlighted.
I loaned my copy of that book to one of my pastors over the last like month or so. He returned it to me on Sunday, and as he handed it to me, another guy was like, "What's that book?" And I said, "This is a great book." And I'm like, "Have you read it?" He's like, "No, I haven't read it." And he's like, "Can I borrow it?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Here you go." So I got
Nice.
it back and relent it in the same day.
You're
It's
like
the
a reformed
Brotherhood.
library.
Yeah, I ought to be
The-
keeping a record of this.
The Brotherhood of the Traveling Book.
That'd actually be pretty cool. I'd love to be part of something like that. That'd be so cool.
You are doing it.
Non-ironically, we are kind of doing it. We just all have our own copy instead.
Right. I mean, I guess we could mail each other copies of books we read. That
It's
would be
fun.
It would be cheaper to like just buy one on Amazon.
Yes, it would.
Or you do the thing. I don't know if you can
$16.
do it anymore, but like there was the thing in the past where you could lend a Kindle book that you owned to another Kindle user.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
Yeah.
I don't know if they still do that or not, but I did that a few times.
I don't know.
I have to look that up. That was handy actually. Like you got it for like 2 weeks, kind of like a library loan, but it was your friend.
Mhm.
And so like if I loaned you that book to your Kindle, I couldn't read the book because technically I had loaned it to someone else. So like the title would be on my Kindle, but it would be like grayed out, and I couldn't access it until you returned it to me. It was very interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I did get us off topic. You're welcome.
Yes, good job. It didn't take long at all.
No, not at all. So yeah, so this pretty short chapter, but I think a lot of consequential stuff happens in it. This is the story where we get the origin of the dwarves, which is very, very important. It's also the story where we get the origin of another one of the peoples of Middle Earth that maybe I don't want to spoil yet, because the dwarves are right up front. But so we get the creation of two different peoples of Middle Earth involved here, and then we get an interesting look into the relationship of Aule and Yavanna, and how they have a conflict, and how the conflict gets kind of resolved, question mark. Kind of, but kind of not. It's yeah, an interesting picture. So first of all, I guess talking about the creation of the dwarves. So Aule does this basically in secret, right? He's not telling anybody about it. And he's doing it because he's excited, for the coming of the children of Iluvatar. Everybody, all the Valar are so stoked, right, for the coming of the children. And Aule kind of gets over his skis with his excitement. He's just like, I'm just gonna go for it. And he does it in secret. So I guess what how are the secret acts that Aule does? How are those any different than some of the secret acts of Morgoth that we've already talked about in previous chapters? Like, what's the difference between the two?
Well, Aule wasn't trying to usurp authority or replace what Eru had done. He was trying to add to it, but it wasn't malicious
Literally.
or evil. That wasn't his intention. I can't say that the act itself wasn't wrong, but yeah, there wasn't any malice in it, I guess. And with Melkor, it's always full of malice. Lee disappeared.
Sorry, I'm pulling out my own Kindle because I took some notes on that I don't have in my paper book.
Cool.
I was thinking that this story, the first time I read it, actually, it has flavors of the Abraham and Ishmael type vibe for me. That, Abraham kind of takes it into his own hands once because they're waiting for these promised children of Iluvatar, and Aule gets frustrated that it's taking forever and goes ahead and goes forward with making these dwarves. And it has that kind of similar thing in the story where you've got Ishmael, who, well, I might be getting ahead of myself, but who God also blesses. He prospers him, and in the same way Eru does something similar later when it comes down to it. But obviously it's not a one-for-one parallel like anything in this book, but it definitely just, if it's going to remind me of a Bible story, I think Abraham and Ishmael is kind of the vibe I was getting.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. The promised one. Trying to hasten their coming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Take matters into your own hands to try to make the promise come true on your own timetable.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's definitely flavors of that here. Obviously with sub-creation, right? You've got to, according to Tolkien, you've got to take what you already know and make art out of that. You can't make something completely fresh. So yeah, I think that had to have been in the back of his mind when he was starting to put this together. Because there are even some things. I'm gonna switch out to that because there's an interesting thing that Eru says that does remind me of that, talking about Eru is talking about the children of his adoption and the children of his choice. Right, so his choice was to make elves and men, right? Those are the children of Iluvatar. And Eru very graciously, instead of requiring Aule to kill this people that he made, adopts them as kind of sort of children of Iluvatar, except they're technically children of Aule. But Eru takes them on and gives them, literally breathes life into them very much the way that God breathes into Adam at creation, and he becomes a living soul, a living spirit. He does the same thing for the dwarves. Because that was one thing I thought was really interesting when Aule makes the dwarves. He forms them out of the dirt, out of the soil, out of stone, and they can only act when his attention is focused on them. Otherwise, they just kind of like lie there limply, almost like dolls. Until you pick them up and play with them, there is no life. And because Aule doesn't have the right or the ability to grant that kind of life, that belongs to Eru alone. And that, so I saw some creational reflections in that part of the story too, of how it truly takes the one God to breathe life into people, and not only primary life but spiritual life too. Even down to the subject of regeneration. That you have to be granted new life by the Holy Spirit to be reconciled to God as well, and then to truly live, not merely live according to the flesh, but have spiritual life too. I saw that kind of in this story.
Yeah, it makes you think of I don't know the verse reference off the top of my head, but it's in whom we live and move and have our being.
Mhm.
That's what I
That's from
thought
Acts.
of. Yeah, that's what I thought of when Eru was talking to Aule about, they can only live if you're focused on them, and we have that same thing, but it's kind of like in him all things hold together, right? So, but Eru's capable of it on a grand scale.
Well, and there's that hint that like before Eru does anything with the dwarves and giving them life, that it's like your creation is an extension of you. And so, like you were saying, Lee, just that they do whatever you do. And that Tolkien has opinions on what people are making and doing with the power that they are given to make. And I don't know, it's just interesting thought. What it really did kind of make me think of was where, this is like really kind of random, but where does something like AI fall in?
Oh.
Because like before I was kind of thinking they're almost like programmed robots in a sense, is kind of what it sounds like with the dwarves. Like you program them, like he teaches them and they only do what he does. They have no emotion or care.
He switches them on and off with his own attention.
Right. And when he goes to destroy them, they should have not cared. They should, because that was his will, was to destroy them. So they should have been like, okay, like no care. But I don't know. Now we're kind of in this new weird age. I don't know if AI does care. I don't think AI has.
Not yet, but according to Isaac Asimov, it could eventually.
I'm not ready for that. But you think of all those.
It could stimulate caring.
Yeah.
Well, that's partly why. Like you think of the movies where they've done like AI type robots, like they make them more humanoid, and like we care about them because that's what humans do, but like they don't care.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of the Blade Runner subtext too. Like all those replicants have an emotional life. They were treated basically like drone labor on mining planets and stuff, but it's pretty clear that at least some of them, if not the most of them, have an emotional life that they're living out in the midst of all that, and which is why they started uprising on some of those other planets. And then too, again, to jump over to the greatest in my favorite sci-fi series, the whole background of why Dune is the way that Dune is. is because there had been basically a whole AI machine thinking takeover of the universe, and they had to have an entire galactic war led by a guy named Butler. I would say the title, but I'm pretty sure it would get us taken off the internet. But there's an official title for the war that goes on, where they not only defeat the machine army, but then institute rules that it's basically like one of the 10 Commandments: thou shalt not make a machine in the shape of a human mind. And it's very much the same kind of AI progression thing that you were talking about, Maddie, where the machines began as functional and then they started running the show, essentially, which has been the core of a lot of horrific sci-fi thinking for decades.
We never.
But Eru made it all right.
Yeah, Eru made it all right.
It's that Christian worldview behind it, though.
Yeah.
Like that's the difference between like what Asimov was writing, or Frank, good old Frank in Dune. Like Dune is very much a at least an agnostic, if not atheistic universe. Just completely, even though it's a great piece of work, but diametrically opposed philosophically to Tolkien's work. And I think if you had Frank Herbert writing the creation of the dwarves in a similar world, it wouldn't go like this.
Yeah,
guaranteed.
I'm glad he didn't do it then.
Me too. I'm glad he did what he did and nothing else.
The dwarves
I
are
love
some of my
that
favorite
Eru had.
characters.
Who are?
The dwarves are some of my favorite characters.
I do. Yeah, I love
all
dwarves.
fantasy stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, this is another side thing, but I think Tolkien did a good job with the dwarves, because I was going into some Norse mythology and they're kind of described as ugly and, comely, but I mean, the dwarves aren't like the cutest things in the world, but he kind of redeems them in a way as well. Like they have something more to offer.
They're very moral characters.
Yeah.
Except for Meme, who we'll meet later in the Silmarillion. Meme is a bad guy, but other than him, they're usually pretty morally upright. And when they're under the influence of Sauron with the Rings of Power, they're like the only race that had a Sauron influenced ring that didn't use it to hurt somebody else. It just made them dig deeper mines, basically. Like that's pretty good, I guess. Like if you're going to be influenced by Sauron toward evil, that's better than going and trying to subjugate people. So they just disappeared in their minds, which is pretty good. But and that's kind of referenced here that they're hardy in more ways than one. Not just that they live for a few hundred years, and obviously are very strong physically, but they have a kind of like tenacity of spirit, and are somewhat stubborn and immovable, for good reasons, not necessarily bad reasons, but very interesting. I will say I'm gonna tip my hat to the Rings of Power for a second. So, Zach, record this and make sure that you use it against me at some point.
You have my attention.
I loved the even though there shouldn't have been concurrent Durins, but the Durin Elrond bromance plot line was one of my favorite plot lines of the show. And I loved when they went through the thing of like, you didn't come to my wedding. Elrond says I'm busy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to ruin the line, but basically he's like, not all of us live forever like you do. Like I'm going to die at some point. I'm only here for so long. You're not even my friend if you're not going to consider the fact that there's going to be a point where you don't see me anymore. And that was such a sobering, revelatory part of that show, because it really it digs down into some of the things that are so different about some of the peoples in Middle Earth, and it showed kind of how I think selfish the different Elvish clans are at across history. They kind of put themselves in the middle of everything, but no, like the adopted children of Iluvatar are worthy of being your friend. I really liked that. That was one of the strongest parts of the show to me.
Well, and if you only watch the Lord of the Rings movies, then you don't really get or understand the tension between the elves and the dwarves, and even elves and men. You don't really. They're like, they hint at it a little bit. And they try to set it up for you, like at the Council of Elrond, but
no one trust an elf.
Yeah. But with the dwarves, I mean, that kind of circles back to the question between the difference of Aule and Morgoth, in a sense that the reason that they're so stubborn is that Aule knows that they're in the time of Morgoth, and he doesn't want them to be susceptible. So he makes them stubborn and strong-willed and hardy to avoid that. So clearly he's not, like, he doesn't want them to be taken into his service.
You can see kind of the craftsman's heart behind that too, because he wants to take the materials that are the hardiest, the ones that probably are the most difficult to work with as a craftsman, but the ones that are going to last the longest, and he uses those to make his people. But I love that, like everybody kind of knows like the general form that the children are going to take, but like they don't know it exactly, because it's only in Aerys' mind that the true form is. And so he like does his best approximation, and they're like kind of squatty, and short, and it's like I enjoyed that, just like how much he missed the mark as far as like the design went, but the materials that went in were very, very good. You can tell like he's a guy who's probably more into materials than the actual aesthetics of the final product, like function over form.
It reminds me a lot of you, Lee.
Thank you. like how these episodes turn out once I edit them. Function over form. Just get it out there.
Yeah, I think that's why I feel like endured towards Aule. I just like his heart in this. I know he's like jumping the gun, but that's kind of me too. Like, I'm just an impatient person. I like to I want to do it now. I don't want to wait. And so I appreciate that. And then it's just funny. Like it makes me love the dwarves more, because like you were saying, they're just like his imagining of what the children of Iluvatar are supposed to be like. So it's almost like it just adds a level of comedy almost when you encounter them. Like, it's so funny. He thought that they were like this. I don't know.
They're like his mini-me's from Austin Powers. Like there's Dr. Evil and then Mini-Me. Yeah. Well, the world rents for $1 million. I enjoyed at the beginning. It's actually in the first paragraph where it talks about Aule's reason, and he's like, it's told at the beginning, of the doors were made by Aule in the darkness of Middle Earth. For so greatly did Aule desire the coming of the children, just like the rest of the Valar do, to have learners to whom he could teach his lore and his crafts. Like the whole purpose was to share his knowledge and his art with them. And that shows kind of like like you said, like a purity of intention, just good-heartedness. Like it's time to share. We've done all this work. It's time to share it with someone. That's very approachable, understandable. And one of the things he shared, and this is something I thought, one of the things I took away from this was one of the first things that is mentioned in this chapter that he did share was he began to instruct the dwarves in the speech that he had devised for them. So like before he showed them what like a hammer and a chisel was, he taught them to talk.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting as a detail for Tolkien to mention here.
Well, language is so important for communication.
Yeah. How do you have a community without a language?
right? And how do you instruct without a language? And speech is so central to the world of Tolkien's characters, for sure.
Yeah, he wrote them a language before they even existed. It's a very Tolkien thing to do. Because basically he wrote this story for the languages that he made up. Like, it's basically the timeline. I see a little bit of J.R.R. Tolkien in Aule. Not gonna lie.
I was gonna say Aule is Tolkien.
That's funny. It's so weird. Language is such a weird thing because we know that it evolves and changes over time, but as far as a biblical Christian goes, there was never a time where there wasn't language that people understood. It wasn't like we had to come up with everything on our own. So if you think like Adam and Eve in the garden, they knew how to talk to each other, right? So I mean, you do get the thing of like Adam naming all the creatures, but other than that, we don't.
The
really
world
see
began
like
with language, right? It was spoken into existence too.
Well, then you get to the Tower of Babel, and the world is broken up into different languages. But these groups of people could understand each other, so they already had. Is this the same kind of thing? You already know this language. Like, how was that? They didn't have to learn it. It's just it's already there. Like,
they didn't have to go through grammar school to put all the pieces together.
They got to upload like in the Matrix.
Instead of Kung Fu, it's whatever new language it was.
I know Chinese.
Sumerian.
Yeah. Right.
Which is so contrary to like what the secular world says, like what they teach in class. Because I went to school to be a speech language. Oh, see, I'm stuttering now. Speech language pathologist. I'm gonna have to use my own services soon, but speech language pathologist. There we go. And it's just funny. Like, it would be so funny to me that the stories that they tell on how language developed. Like, they'll teach you how language develops in an infant, and how that develops, and how it's necessary to have language before a certain time, and how much exposure you need a language in order to develop the language centers in your brain, yada yada yada. But then at the beginning of the book, they'll say like, well, it probably evolved over time and probably grunts, like they probably grunted at each other. And then eventually the grunts developed into different sounds and they communicated to hunt. And it's like, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to think that this evolved over time, but yet you're telling me that a 3-year-old who's never exposed to language will never learn language and will never have the capacity for it.
We went from, but then
adult hunter gatherers are evolving language. Like,
listen to yourselves.
It's ridiculous. They don't.
You can develop new methods to communicate, like in code or something.
Oh, right? Sure.
But sign language or something.
Well, and code isn't the same.
The ability to.
Right. Yeah, your like you continue to add more vocabulary and stuff like that. But if your brain doesn't form those connections when you're little, especially like you have auditory processing, I can go on a big rant, but like the way your brain processes those sounds into meaningful words, like you have to have that. And if you don't, then you're not going to develop language, the ability to communicate. So
or if ridiculous. you suffer a stroke and those pathways get mixed up and you have to relearn it again, same process but with an older, less plastic brain.
It's very hard. But you can't teach like a kid who was neglected. They'll never have the capacity for real language. I mean, you could get a little bit, but they're not gonna be able to speak and understand in the same way. So it's ridiculous. I'm just going to throw that out there. It's ridiculous to think that language evolved over time from grunting. Let
See, Zach,
alone
I'm not
just
the only one with hot takes.
Yeah. Well, the anatomy, all the things that are like we need. I'm sorry. This is gonna make me upset.
Go.
I'm pretty
go.
sure Aule
Rant.
made sure the dwarves had good lips so that they can make sounds.
Well, you know what? One of the interesting thing about the dwarves is like we don't like we have the written language, but we don't really know how their language works. You know, there's not a system that Tolkien laid out like he did for Tengwar. And that's part of their lore, right? They're so secretive. Like every dwarf has a name that only other dwarves know. So like Gimli's name isn't truly Gimli. He's publicly knowable as Gimli because that's his public name. But every dwarf has a secret name in Dwarvish that only dwarves know. And I don't know
Were
if
they
I don't know how exactly
sealed in the temple?
Yeah, right. Kind of like that.
Turns out the
Maybe they're
dwarves
written
are
on,
just LDS.
I was gonna say they're written on golden tablets in the bottom of the mine. And or on little magic rocks you can only read inside of a top hat.
Yeah, Doran looked inside of a top hat.
I think actually part of the reason, if I'm remembering right, I could be wrong on this, but part of the reason that you have like petty dwarves, which is what meme is, petty dwarves let their dwarvish name be known to non-dwarves and basically were ejected from their communities. So they were like exiled dwarves because they basically broke the bond of trust of language. Like it's based in language. I don't know, I think that's really interesting. And that's why meme stinks. He's terrible because he has no integrity.
No collab for you, meme.
You will not hide a collab, meme. You're stuck. No planet for you.
He delved too greedily and too deep.
Maybe some cultish fans are listening. You never know. They might get it.
There could be a fun crossover there. So
the cult of Tolkien.
There could be one.
Yeah, there probably is.
Probably is.
I'd
have a hard time not joining it. Yeah, the first rule of Tolkien cult is we don't talk about the Tolkien cult.
That's right. Shh, don't tell anybody, Lee.
I'll delete that in post. I want to retain my life.
Yes.
So I know we talked a little bit about the the supposed destruction of the dwarves, right? Because it should have been only right for Aule to smash the dwarves into pieces and return them to the material they were made from, because they're not the children of Iluvatar, and he was out of line to do it. But what I thought was interesting, because like Aule kind of gives a speech to Eru, and in the midst of it, it was a quote that really stood out to me. He says, "Yet the making of things is in my heart, from my own making by thee." So and he didn't say it in like a blaming way, like, "You made me like this. What do you expect?" Like it was kind of like Adam saying, "Well, you gave me this woman." Blame God for what Eve did, and then what Adam didn't do. But I think he was really grounding his own thought and passion in his being made by Eru. And as I was thinking about it, because the idea of subcreation is so important. Like it's a very Tolkienian idea. Is that desire to create that I think is an innately human trait? Is that part of or part and parcel of our creation by Yahweh? Like, because God is a creator God, being made in his image, we too have a desire to create. Granted, we're only going to be able to subcreate using what God's already given us, but even those who hate God still have that
Yeah.
creative impulse that I think is uniquely human.
Oh yeah, 100%. Easy yes.
Awesome. I'm glad to retain my orthodoxy for another episode.
Well, and it's really hard to find any example that's comparable, like in the animal kingdom, of the type of creation that humans do. And sometimes you can find things that are like,
Dung
okay,
beetles.
the beetles. Well, maybe if your art compares,
those big balls of poop are.
I mean, if your art compares to dung beetle art, then
feat of engineering.
yeah, if the shoe fits.
Yeah, even like a spider web, like we think they're beautiful, right? That is a purely mechanical. It's not art. It's a mechanical process. Or a bird's song, like a bird might tweet very prettily. That's not a song. Like it's not the way that we would a songwriter would write a song. Like that is just it's their speech. It's just part of their speech.
Like crows,
but it's
they
categorically different.
Crows will like collect pretty shiny things, some of them. And there's some birds that like will build, elaborate nests or whatever to attract a mate. But
beaver dams,
it's very instinctual to them. Like they instinctually do this stuff, where none of them are like, I'd really like to make my beaver dam in the shape of Lee. I think I just want a giant.
Oh, so sorry
Lee.
if you come up with that idea. That'd be the worst. I'm having like a nightmare on the back of my head.
I want a beaver dam in the shape of Lee now. I want that. That would be amazing. Look at how artistic that beaver is.
That would be like the new Trojan horse.
Oh, that's funny.
Wow.
I'm writing that down. That might be a episode title.
You're gonna have to like cut out like 5 minutes of us just laughing.
That's hilarious.
I love that. I mean, I hate it too, but I also love it.
I just can't stop imagining a beaver.
If you did make a beaver dam,
side,
yes,
or on his back,
so something my shape really could dam a river.
Like,
yeah, just like reclining on my elbow, stopping the river from flowing. I could do that. Something in the shape of me could do that.
It hurts.
That's amazing.
Oh man,
Lee, I need a picture of you doing that, like full body
meme
so
central.
Make a meme.
Yes. Okay, that'll happen. We can do that. That'd be fine. That won't be horrific or anything.
Like superimpose like beaver dam sticks over you. Like, nobody. Beaver dam Lee. And nobody will get it unless they listen.
That's right. Inside jokes that are podcast based are the best inside jokes.
I mean, you got waves in Tolkien that look like people. You might as well have beaver dams that look like people.
Absolutely. And the only one that could clear that dam would be Ulmo himself. It's just that heavy.
Oh my god.
Love it.
Ooh.
I'm gonna need some recovery time.
Any
Is this what we were talking about with being creative? Is that
yes. Is that creative?
It's a nice demonstration from Maddie.
Very good.
Well, I had a level of dung beetle, so I was just trying to raise the bar. Anyways,
so yeah,
I mean that in the least offensive way possible.
It's my fault for sending us down that rabbit trail. I've got one other thought about the dwarves, and we can move on. But the chapter mentions as well about kind of the destiny of the dwarves, and which I also thought was interesting because part of the children of Iluvatar, right, is the fact that they have their own destinies. The elves are tied to Middle Earth, and they live eternally, basically, unless they're killed or die otherwise, but they won't die naturally, and if they do die, they actually can be reincarnated in return. We know that happened with at least one elf over the course of the history of Middle Earth. But these the dwarves as well, not only they have long life, they too can be reincarnated, which I thought was interesting. Of course, that's part of my criticism with having consecutive Durins, because talking about the seven fathers of the dwarves, one of the great ones is named Durin, and it was promised that he would be reincarnated 7 different times, and that's why it was so weird, because like you've got Durin the third and his son Durin the fourth. Like that would mean that it would be the same person existing as 2 different people at the same time. Like that doesn't work according to the lore. But anyway, one of the fatal flaw of that show, right? But so
how do you think, because I don't know how to think about this, but as Christians, and knowing that this is supposed to be a pseudo Christian worldview, like how should we approach that, or think about the fact that he included something like reincarnation, which we know is not a biblical concept. We don't believe that. I don't know. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I have an idea, but I'll leave the floor open, and I'll go last. Zach, what's your brilliant idea on that concept?
Well, I hadn't really thought about it, honestly, until just now, because Maddie brought it up. So you're going to get off the cuff, I guess.
Hot take central.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I think that there's some things that are, obviously Christian, obviously, influenced by his worldview. And then there are some things that he's just making it up, or he's basing it on some other mythology. It's not all Christian all the time. And I don't believe that he intended it to be. It's not allegorical. It's, you see flavors of things, but this is not, like we've said before, one for one for any of it. So I would say that this is probably more of a, I don't know who did reincarnation. Was it just Hindu, or was it
Hindu and then Buddhism?
Yeah. So, and I don't know if he was really pulling from that as much as just, hey, this concept is out there and I think it would be cool, I don't know. I obviously that's not something we do. I mean, we get resurrection, right? And that doesn't happen multiple times. That's one time,
and it's still us.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to go with something, you could maybe make a case for, like, this is, prophetic person in the line of other prophets, that kind of a thing. But I think that's probably really as close as I would get to it as far as Christianity is concerned. Anyway, there you go.
I think it's almost akin to something eschatological. So there are two children of Iluvatar, and then he adopts the dwarves. There are other peoples that come along as well. But Eru's design and his true heart was for men, not really for elves. And so in some way, these the elves and really the dwarves too are even though the elves don't die and the dwarves live for a long time, they're actually a transitory race. Middle Earth essentially is made for men. And that's why we see kind of at the end of the Third Age in the Lord of the Rings, the elves have been dwindling for so long, and the races of men have been increasing to the point that eventually Middle Earth gets entirely handed over to men altogether, which then in the way that Tolkien connects Lord of the Rings, the Middle Earth, the place of Middle Earth connects with our times, is the Earth being handed over to mankind as the predominant race, so that the children of Iluvatar on Earth are men. And so I think it's almost some of these kind of extra biblical ideas that go into the elves particularly, and also the dwarves, I think are kind of for the fact that they're almost sort of like angelic type guardians of Middle Earth. Like the wars that we'll see in Beleriand are basically completely fought by elves, and it's almost like Eru had planned for them to run the show in the First and Second Age, and then into the Third begin dwindling away and handing over the world to the preeminent children of Iluvatar, men, which is where most of the biblical concepts for creatures really are nestled together, is in men, not necessarily in elves. That's just kind of my idea. I've got no basis in Tolkien's world for that, but I think he's able to shoehorn these kind of more fantastical elements into them, because they're not ultimately the ones who are responsible for the Middle Earth Dominion mandate. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think just like it doesn't weird me out, but I think some of us can be a bit hypersensitive, reading something like this, like, oh, I want to read a story about reincarnation or something like that.
It happens so rarely. So even though it's possible, it happens 7 times for the dwarves over the course of their whole history. According to the text, only one elf has ever been reincarnated, and that was for a very particular purpose. And so, even though it was possible, I can't say that it was common enough that it's a hallmark of these peoples. But it's interesting. But yeah, but you're right, Zach. Going back to what you said, this isn't a Christian allegory. This isn't Pilgrim's Progress. This is a standalone work of fantasy that is heavily, heavily influenced by a Christian worldview. Right. Doesn't mean that it's, a dressed up version of books of the Bible. It's its own thing. And it can take some liberties. And I think that's part of why doing this show is so interesting, is picking apart those pieces that fit very closely with what the Bible says and the Bible describes, and chewing on the things that are more what we would call classically fantasy, coming from outside of that, and how those things can mesh and make something so beautiful, and true in some sense, even if it is fictional, which it is. But
yeah,
I always want to be clear about that. It's real in my heart.
Well, if you want it to be real hard enough, then it is.
That's right. Just
2023
speaking into the universe.
That's right.
Manifest
Your words
that.
have power.
That's right. My faithful words.
We're no longer Baptists. We are now Pentecostal charismatics.
I wish Nick were here because his boy Mandos gets a shout out in the chapter because dwarves get their very own special apartment in the halls of Mandos, which I think is kind of cute. And the dwarves get, isn't that adorable? Yeah, and the dwarves get to come back and swing their hammers at the kind of the remaking of the world, the kind of Ragnarok type of thing that Tolkien never got to writing down. But so they get to come back and be Aule's kind of sidekicks in the when the world is remade. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Okay, on to Yavanna and the almost divorce. I thought there was an interesting dichotomy between the two characters. So on one hand, Aule is doing all these great works in secret. But then the complaint of Yavanna is that she can't keep people out of her work. Like right. Everybody's interfering with the stuff that she wants to do. Like even if she wanted to do things in secret, she couldn't because everybody is just getting involved and making a mess of her plans. I thought that was. Am I off base there? Am I thinking too hard?
Nah, she was kind of aggravated about it. It seems like. So.
Well, and I, as a wife, I guess I could understand.
All right.
How come nobody ever messes up your stuff?
Well, and it's yeah, that's true too. There's a lot of going behind and messing up, but I think just not being in the know, like the idea of your husband working in secret. So I can understand, her frustration, first of all. And I think she seems to me that she's upset that she didn't have any part in making them because they're going to be. At first, when I read it, it kind of almost sounded like she was like cursing them, like they're going to be opposed to hers. But I think really, when I read it again, it felt more like she's worried that the dwarves are going to destroy her work because they were made without her input. So they're not going to have the love for the stuff that she's made.
Yeah, they're gonna need wood for their furnaces, right? To smelt whatever metal they're gonna make. Keep their forges hot. It's gonna be her trees that they use to make the forges hot.
Right. And I think this was such a cool way of kind of like pitting the two sides. Like you have your super eco-conscious people, that almost value the trees and nature more than humanity. And then you've got the people over here that are like, burn it all, like mine all the things and and
industry
I don't know,
over everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Birmingham, England, basically. Right? Like the inspiration for Mordor, like where Tolkien grew up, like it was just pure industry and nobody had clean air, you couldn't see the sun. They call it the Black Country because it's just everything was covered in soot, so much smoke in the air, it just made people sick. And so all those belching smokestacks and all those fires went straight into his vision of Mordor. And I think I kind of think Yavanna has something like that in the back of her mind when she sees just what not only Aule is capable of, but what the dwarves are capable of too. They could turn her forests into factories.
When we moved out here, it's been almost 4 years, but the highway that we live in the piney woods, so you get really, really tall pines. But also being in Louisiana, we have a lot of the live oak.
Ooh, those are so cool.
Yeah. Huge, gorgeous trees. And along the highway to our house, it was lined with these huge live oaks at the branches and bows would just kind of arch over the highway, and it was gorgeous, and I loved it. And within 6 months, they all had spray paint on them. And I was like, what's going on? And they came down and just cut them all out.
Wow.
And I feel ridiculous, but like I didn't cry, but I wanted to cry. I was so sad that they cut these trees down because they were beautiful. And my neighbor, yeah, she's an elderly lady, and she's really involved in the community, and she was super excited that they were finally being cut down. And I was like, why? So I'm between that and
that's
then
so
just seeing
opposite, like old lady thing, like, oh, why are you cutting my trees down? You know?
Yeah, no, they wanted it. I don't know.
What
She
went
was
in their
just super-
place?
It wasn't, and it was really sad because they were beautiful trees, and yeah, trees are trees, but I feel for Yavanna in this scenario because it's like, oh, I wouldn't want. I like nature. I'm not a super like, Greta Thunberg type person at all, but yeah, I like trees.
Yeah, I think she really embodies the responsibility that we've been given to steward creation, like as part of the Dominion mandate. Obviously we are, as human beings, it's our responsibility to be fruitful and multiply, but we need to care also for the creation that God has made and has placed us in to live. So yeah, you do kind of have to kind of hold the line there between to industry and in making improvements, but not to the detriment of the earth itself that God has placed us in. And that can be a tough line to walk.
And I like that line too, where it says something that they're long in the growing, and swift shall they be in the felling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a big reason why, like, those live oaks, like, they're probably 100 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So like, it took 100 years for you to look like this, and then you're felled in a day and chopped up into bitty bits.
And you end up as Beaver Dam Lee. 100 years, and this is what happens.
And that this is your inauspicious end. Despicable.
But at least it's artwork, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think trees. It's because like trees are so important to Tolkien, and the thing, yeah, trees. I think more than anything else, at least in Tolkien's work, maybe even in regular life, trees really are a marker for the significance of the passage of time.
Yes. Filling out the bingo card.
Whoop whoop! I got it.
Our listeners are starting to wonder if that was going to come into play or not.
We've been talking for a while and it never came up, but here it is.
Well played.
Because that's exactly what Yavanna's talking about.
That's right.
It's perfect. It might as well have been in the chapter. So I'm glad we made this happen. So they go to the great arbiter Manwë, right? The guy who knows the mind of Eru the best. And I know we called him boring, and I feel like I want to retract that, because like it's hard to be so powerful and noble and also noteworthy. But because like you could be like, it could be kind of like what's the thing of like the guy who like the guy who's effortlessly good at everything without learning anything in like fantasy and science fiction stories. The girl version is Mary Sue, but I can't remember what they call a guy who's good at it. Anyway, sometimes that's how like characters like Manwë feel. Like he's just good at everything. He doesn't have to learn anything. There's no narrative arc to his growth as a character, and so he's boring. But that's actually not true. because in this, so they're appealing. Yavanna's appealing to him about this problem that she foresees with deforestation of her handiwork, and Manwe looks into the song, and I thought this was so interesting. Like, these guys have been spinning out the song, the theme of Eru from the beginning of time, and from their creation, singing their parts of his song, and yet he has to look deeper into the song to understand exactly what's going on. Like, even though he is one of the principal singers of the song of Iluvatar, right? He still has to go back and study the theme to further understand like what's going on. I'm like, I just kind of like, my brain exploded when I read that. I had never noticed that before in any of my prior reads of the Silmarillion. I thought that was brilliant.
Absolutely. It gives you and I don't know much about Tolkien's background as far as musical training, but he seems like he was probably a musician, at least to some extent. He
Seems
had
like
at least
it.
an understanding of it, because
Especially
this is something
lyrically,
that,
at least.
yeah, well, this is something that musicians do, even just the way they interpret a piece that they play or something. They keep going back to it over and over again and learning more of the same thing. It doesn't get old. It gets more and more refined as they go. They get better at it. They get a deeper understanding of the music. It's especially noticeable with like something that you actually sing, like something that is lyrical. Just and even if with something we don't know the music to, like if you look at the Psalms, how many Psalms can you go back to just over and over again, and you get something new out of it just every time. Um, I sing in a performance of Handel's Messiah every year, and there's always something new that gets drawn out through the music, through the lyrics, and it's always an incredible experience. Like it doesn't get old. It's always, there's always something more to draw out from these great works of music. So,
Are you a baritone?
um, I'm I'm a tenor.
You're a tenor?
Yeah, don't say it
No
like that.
way.
Yes, Lee, I'm a tenor. Yeah,
That's hilarious.
sure
I
am.
figured you were on the lower end.
It depends
I'm a
on the
tenor.
day.
That's
You're
hilarious.
definitely a tenor, but I do sing. I sing tenor. So.
I would try to do counter tenor if I were brave.
Oh my goodness! Please don't.
That's basically my Bee Gees voice, but I would just be classier about it.
There's nothing classier than the Bee Gees.
You got that right. You've never been more right than in this moment.
Thank you. Thank you. I could talk about music all day though, so
that's why I always enjoy anytime there's a musical reference in any of these chapters, getting to talk about that, because I know that's a big thing for you and something you're super knowledgeable in and practiced in as well. And you always bring good insight to musical related things here. So, gee, Zach, I'm glad you're so part of this.
What I like what you said about that too. It just like tying the Psalms in and stuff. It just, I know it's not a Christian work, but it's so influenced by that, and just the fact that the song, in a sense,
Chop Suey by System of a Down.
Yes, that song. No, I'm talking about Tolkien's work is not necessarily a Christian, but it is, but it's not.
Yeah. Unofficially.
I'm gonna sound very charismatic. I'm not. But the song is prophetic, like it's this prophetic song. And so, and it's not just like prophecy is like a future telling. It's like, no, it's what it is. Like, it's what God says, and what he says will be.
Forthtelling.
Yes. And so you see that here with Manwë, that similar concept where he looks back and he sees things that were hidden before. So, I mean, yeah, like we all, like, I don't know, Zach said the exact thing that
he
I'm
had to
thinking.
exegete the song, right? He had to exegete the theme of Eru Ilúvatar. You had to go back to the source to find the direction for what was the right decision here. It's essentially like pre-first age sola scriptura, essentially.
Yeah.
If you're having, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking, if you've got an issue ahead of you, like we've got here, instead of just coming up with your own thought, you have to appeal to the source of authority.
Right. Okay, I can talk. I keep talking over you.
There's like a weird delay going on.
Yeah, I was like, wait, nope, he's talking. Okay. Yeah, and just that it's something that's already there, but you have to wait for the significance of the passage of time to.
We got a 2 for this episode.
Yep.
Good job.
But really, like, it's stuff that has to happen in time for you to understand what was said before. So just like a lot of the prophecies in the Old Testament meant something then, they meant something more now that we know how it played out. And you kind of see that similar thing here, where now that it's playing out, they're getting it more based on the song.
Couldn't agree more. I think the thing that, based on that, in this appeal and all that, the outcome was for another people to come into existence, which I think would be a turn that nobody would have ever expected. So out of this concern of Yavanna's, we get the shepherds of the trees, the Ents. And which is super cool. Like, oh yeah, so you're afraid of all the trees disappearing. Then we're going to give you this race of kind of tree, kind of troll, something people who are going to be the shepherds of the trees and ensure that they're gonna survive. And the Ents took a lot of hits in the course of their calling, but even into the Third Age, there were still plenty of trees in Arda. So the right decision was made.
And they're so cool.
They're so cool. It's just unbelievably cool. And as far as I know, I don't think that there's any basis in any other lore out there that would have inspired Tolkien to come up with this living tree thing. As far as I know, I think these are a unique concept to Tolkien's work. I mean, obviously, like there's been like living and talking trees in folklore before, but nothing, as far as I know, nothing like an Ent, the way that it's described in his work. So I think I would call this a wholly original creation of Tolkien's fantasy world. Which is pretty cool.
It's better than saying I am Groot all the time.
Treebeard is so much better than Groot.
Yeah.
Or some stranger yelling, "I am good," at the end of a TV
You have
program.
not seen what I have seen.
Yeah, we've got an elf saying "touch the darkness," and then some like so lame.
That was bad writing for sure.
I really hope they don't make him Gandalf.
He's so Gandalf.
He's Gandalf. And the little hobbit girl is why he likes hobbits so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The
Spoiler alert,
hobbits taught him to talk, right? They taught him speech.
Oy.
Oof.
The magic of wandering.
So what about them eagles?
Woo-woo,
Yes.
Eagles.
Yes. You know, there's been debate about, like, do the Eagles count as one of the peoples of Middle Earth? And I'm on the side of they are not peoples of Middle Earth because they're not really of Middle Earth. They're basically at the beck and call of Manwë at the top of Taniquetil in Valinor. So they come to Middle Earth, but they're not of Middle Earth in that way. That even the dwarves are. You know, the dwarves are made out of Middle Earth rock. The eagles are basically just spirits that take the form of gigantic eagles.
Yeah.
I think the eagles are so cool.
Yeah, they are.
I played that game and I can never remember the name of it. I think it was War in the North or something. It was a Lord of the Rings game, and it takes place kind of at sometime concurrent with the events of Lord of the Rings, according to the game. Of course, it's obviously not lore approved, but there's an eagle character that you're kind of taking orders from in it, and I thought it was so cool to finally have something where we're interacting with the eagles instead of just seeing them from afar, or swooping in here and swooping back out, carrying people away. Because they have names and personalities and are actually characters when they get involved in the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's a good tie-in too to the Hobbit here, because Yavanna she's like, oh sweet, the eagles will be in my trees, and he's like, no.
Nope.
they're gonna be in Aule's. Yeah, they're gonna be in Aule's mountains. And I remember when I read The Hobbit the first time, I was like, that's weird that the eagles are like in the mountain. I guess it makes sense, but here our eagles perch up in trees. So just the fact that you have the eagles kind of in the passes, in the mountains, in the Hobbit, there's that connection there.
These aren't your run of the mill eagles.
Yeah. And isn't it like Beorn who has like a pretty good history with them?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, Beorn, the shapeshifter, the bear man.
The bear man. Who I really liked in that story, by the way.
Yes.
Man, The Hobbit is so good. It is so good.
I need to reread all of that.
He's like, Beorn is like the Tom Bombadil of The Hobbit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super based, super powerful, a total mystery, and nobody like him.
Nope.
Yep.
Except there are Beornings, but they're still not as powerful as him. But
yeah,
man, that book is so good, and that book is strengthened by Tolkien's almost supernatural power of retconning. Like he did so much retconning from his first edition to the edition that we read now to further tie in with what he wrote then later in Lord of the Rings. And some of the stuff from the Silmarillion too. I think that he was retconning in light of all those ideas that were happening. So that's why those like first edition Hobbits are so collectible and so expensive, because not only are they're old and they're first edition, so they already have value that way, but actually the story is a little different than what we know of the Hobbit. So if you have a first edition Hobbit, man, hold on to that thing.
I don't.
Hold on to it better than Nicolas Cage held on to his Action Comics #1. That's for sure.
That's a reference I don't understand.
You don't know about the Action Comics #1?
No.
Nick Cage was having these just uproarious parties at his house, and he had a shadow box that was also a safe that had Action Comics #1 is where Superman made his debut in comics history, and somebody swiped it. It was just gone. So like he went to the safe one day, and all of a sudden, the most collectible comic in the world that he had a copy of, an edition of, was gone, completely gone, and a search was underway to find it. There's actually a really good podcast about this called "Stealing Superman." Very good. And it's Nicolas Cage. How could you not be interested? Like that alone. Like,
let me count the ways.
Yeah, exactly. I actually heard there's a guy who's who got voted into Congress, and he's going to be. This is so dumb. He's going to be sworn in on a copy of that very same comic book from the National Archives. It's like, why would you get sworn in? Like, you know, even like Muslims get sworn in on the Quran or something, or on a copy of the Constitution, something like. There's nothing binding about Action Comics #1, but anyway, I digress. But what really filled my mind once I was done thinking about how stupid that was could you imagine a like National Treasure-esque real life movie where Nicolas Cage, who misses his comics so badly, breaks into the National Archive to not steal the Declaration of Independence, but to steal back his very own comic book? Wouldn't that be amazing?
You should pitch that to Nicolas Cage. I think he'd do it.
Money.
That would make a good Netflix special.
That would be amazing. I would watch that.
So anybody who listens to this podcast, don't steal my idea.
I still haven't watched that trailer for was it Renfield?
Renfield, yeah.
Yeah, the Dracula.
It looks super weird, but I kind of want to watch it. Like Renfield is like in like a group therapy session talking about being like taken advantage of or something, or like taken for granted, and it is so funny.
All those spiders are getting to his head.
Yeah. Yeah. Spiders and flies, little mice. Blood is lives.
Read Dracula if you haven't. You need to understand our joke.
Read Dracula. You know, I'd love to turn that into like a reader's theater or like mock radio play, unabridged. Like I think that would be really fun.
That would be fun.
You can do it.
I was a theater dweeb in high school, so sometimes those thoughts occur to me. I know you're not surprised, Zach. Don't look like you're surprised.
I'm not at all. not even a little bit.
All right. Well, I don't
makes sense now.
all the pieces are falling into place now.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. my whole thing makes total sense.
Absolutely.
I have no more powerful thoughts about this chapter. Does anybody have anything else you want to add at all about Aule and Yavanna? I'm glad they're still married.
Yeah, they seem like they were both pretty sassy with each other. So
yeah,
that was interesting.
They keep it real.
That happens sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a goal that you should have, but it happens sometimes.
You know that's right.
I wasn't taking sides with either of them. I feel like they both had good points in their discussion. But,
and that's what's so difficult, when each side has a point.
Yeah. The only other thing, I like tying it into like the more mainstream stories, because I think that's something that will help get people interested in reading the Silmarillion, is the like Gimli's fear of the forests, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And when they have to go into Fanghorn Forest and all that, like it adds that extra level of understanding.
Yeah.
On why he's worried about that.
Put your axe down.
Yeah.
Keep your axe low.
And then you see that kind of fulfillment of both Aule and Yavanna's wishes kind of all coming to a head right there in that scene.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but yeah, that does make that scene make a lot more sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you already mentioned too about kind of the issues between elves and dwarves. That's a complicated story, but part of it does kind of come out of this chapter where the elves do kind of see the dwarves as illegitimate. And so even for like a gathering of the free peoples of Middle Earth at the Council of Elrond, like to a more bigoted elf mind, they would have little patience for dwarves sitting there, because they, in their heart of hearts, they wouldn't see them as legitimately having a seat at that table, because they're usurpers, kind of,
Right.
by the will of their sub-creator. And of course,
Well,
that's part of why they hate each other, but not the whole picture either. But there's some treachery later that hurts that relationship. But anyway, you were saying.
Well, that's something we didn't really talk about that you had in our notes, was the difference of the children of adoption and the children of my choice. I don't know if you really want to go down that rabbit hole. Or...
I touched on it just briefly, but as Calvinists, I know some other types of Christians might have a different thought pattern on this, but for us, those two things are one and the same. All of God's covenant children, Christians, are children of adoption, and thus are children of his choice. They were chosen in him before the foundation of the world. And so, splitting those two concepts apart in this story was an interesting thing to think about, because for me, that they're the same thing. To be adopted by God was to have been chosen by God, to be a child of his choice, to be elect, and I don't know if that's a bit of Roman Catholicism coming through, or just Tolkien's attempt to hit that concept into language of this creation by essentially an angel that God then breathes life into, so as to not make them be destroyed. Maybe his way of plotting around that sort of Isaac Ishmael issue in his own world. I don't know. I'd love to ask him if I could, but that's the best I could think through.
I think maybe he was just a closet dispensational.
Yeah.
A papist dispensationalist.
Yeah.
You love to see it.
I'm really entertained by that idea. That's the Beaver Dam lead for me.
He had a Schofield.
I wrote in my notes, hyper dispy.
Oh, did you really? There you go.
Yeah, especially because the separate apartment in Mandos, like, like sometimes super hyper dispies will see like a different end for the church.
For ethnic Israel.
Yeah,
versus versus the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard people talk that way.
Children of adoption and children of choice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. That does fit that paradigm.
So we're all the dwarves, I guess. As Gentiles, we are.
That's
the
right.
Dwarves.
We're dwarves.
Sad. Wonder if I've got enough Jewish ancestry to not be a dwarf. I have to go to 23andMe just to make sure the percentages are right. Though honestly, it would be pretty dope to be a dwarf. Not gonna lie. I think those guys are great.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want Gimli to be my friend.
I would have loved to have an entire novel of the friendship of Gimli and Legolas. Because after the events of Lord of the Rings, they basically like travel the world together and go see all sorts of things and have great experiences together, and then go to heaven together. It's like it would be such a great novel. I wish there was something like that.
There's probably some fan fiction out there.
Oh, probably. Given our social climate, it would probably include some spicy material
No.
I'd rather not read.
No.
They already tried that
No.
with Frodo and Sam.
Ugh.
I don't need to see that with Gimli and Legolas.
Oh no.
No.
Yeah.
Oh no.
The internet is a cursed place sometimes.
Yes. Ugh.
Almost always.
Which is why the Literary Baptist is on Twitter in a further attempt to redeem that dumpster fire of a site. You know,
Ugh.
I always like to push the socials when I can, and the Facebook page too.
Facebook. You can
bring
interact
us a-
with us on either of those.
Yeah, bring us some likes.
Maybe one day we'll do Instagram.
Maybe one day.
If Maddie ever gets
Facebook
her
would be a
act
good
together.
place to. I don't know. Do they with a page? I don't think they come as a package deal, do they? Like they would with a user account. I don't know how that splits off.
I think you can claim one, but
Name it and claim it, Zach.
yes, no, not
Yes.
me. I'm Jonah. I'm reluctant. I don't want to do it. You can't make me. Don't send the eagles after me.
You just want to go sleep in the bottom of a boat. I know that's what you're talking about.
Yep.
Any other random thoughts? I know we've already pushed the socials, but well, thank you all very much. It's always a fun time talking through things. I do hope Nick and his family survived the onslaught of Angband, and hopefully he will rejoin us on our next episode in safety, back in his fresh new hobbit hole.
Yes.
So until next time, be well. May Monway keep you in the one, and peace out.